Welcome everybody. I want to preface this video really quick here by saying that it is a freebie brought to you by the people over at my Patreon at patreon.com/theoryunderground.com, which is to say that a lot of the stuff that happens at Theory Underground on the app and the website is courses, right? It's courses, and it's for people who want to be in like these smaller cohorts going through specific subject matters that might not be something for YouTube at large. And there are people, though, who want to see more stuff up on the YouTube side, who want to see more stuff up on the podcast side. And so this was all made possible by my patrons. Shout out to Darian Large, Nikolaj, and Sahil. Thank you so much, guys, for making this possible, as well as my other new patrons. You guys rock. Thank you so much. Okay, but really quick, I just want to say that this is the first part in an ongoing series that happens on the fourth Sunday of every month at Theory Underground. It's a seminar that you can get involved with. It's called CDT, or Critical Doxology and Time Energy Theory. I'm going to get into what those things are throughout the course of the lecture. You'll see my wife Anne actually unpacking 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Mr. Covey, which is kind of like a business success, self-help kind of book. And the time energy intervention, this sort of critical theoretical approach to this text is something that I hope you will get a lot out of, actually. And so that's why we're putting it out here and making it possible for you all just to have this one as a freebie. But really quick, what is critical doxology? It's basically a critique of common sense, a sympathetic critique, at the same time that it's from the standpoint of time energy theory, right? And so what is time energy? It's, in short, though this is approximate and not completely accurate, it is large energy infused repeatable blocks of time throughout your week. Okay. Something that you can reliably harness and use towards the things that you care about. But because we don't have that, we want to understand what it is, how it works, and how we might be able to get it. So that's what this is ultimately all going to be about. And so I hope you enjoy, get something out of it. Drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much. Peace. Welcome everybody to Critical Doxology and Time Energy Seminar. This was originally called Time Energy Seminar. Simple. Time Energy Seminar. But what we're calling Critical Doxology now is actually a component of what has been going on at the Critical Media Theory Seminar here for the last, well, almost a year. I mean, it's been a long time that we've been doing the Critical Media Theory Seminar. And we liked the format of that one so much that when I was trying to figure out what to do with the Time Energy Seminar, I thought, no, I want to do it more like the Critical Media Theory Seminar, because that's been a real success in terms of people's glowing reviews. Look, we've got Philip nodding his head, so that's how you know. That's how you know it's cool. But you got Lukas over here. He was also in Critical Media Theory Seminar. And what is that? What's the basic gist of that format as opposed to what was going to happen with the Time Energy Seminar before I brought in the critical doxology component? I'll say what that format is, and then I'll hit on a couple points of order about the syllabus and the schedule, and then I will say a few more things about critical doxology, why we're doing it this way, and that will set the stage for Anne, and then she will give a presentation on the critical doxological artifact of the month, which is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Some people who read the Time Energy book and or the previous one, Waypoint, had already said that it is kind of like a critique of self-help culture. And those people were right? This is where I come from. This is where I come into the life of the mind. I was a worker with earbuds who had never read nonfiction in his early 20s. I'd never even been through a real schooling system. I hadn't even learned how to read before the age of 12, right? And so here I was in my early 20s, stocking shelves in a grocery store, working a graveyard shift, listening to podcasts, right? And I was listening to whatever my friend was listening to. We were both listening to all kinds of crazy stuff. We were both really interested in DMT. And so, of course, we were listening to Joe Rogan talk about his experiences with DMT and float tanks, We liked the idea of float tanks so much that we actually built one when we were roommates. And this is like, like 13, 14 years ago at this point. Well, that listening to Joe Rogan thing became a sort of pipeline into the world of nonfiction, of serious nonfiction. Now we can say, oh, but how serious is it really? Isn't he just the Oprah for guys? And in a sort of sense, fair enough. Oprah also got people turned on to nonfiction, right? This might mean memoirs. This might mean self-help. This might mean business success, but these are nonfiction, and they get arguably philosophical. Like if you're in the United States and you've been into many people's living rooms, you've probably seen that Four Agreements book on somebody's coffee table. It's a cute little coffee table book. Maybe it's on the top of a toilet somewhere. I had a job that took me into a lot of people's houses. I saw that book a lot of places, but there's other books like that. Also through Oprah, there was The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. That one was everywhere. Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, everywhere. Well, what is it about these kinds of books that makes them so popular? This is probably a pretty important question from a critical theory perspective, but it's one that kind of, I think, for the most part, people roll their eyes about. And I get it to a certain extent. Like I also will roll my eyes about it. I mean, in fact, I've been in arguments about the power of now with people. But the point is that, we have to ask ourselves why we roll our eyes at something that normal, regular, working class people take so seriously. Is it because we're just angry because these books are misleading them? Is it because we feel like it's an insult to their intelligence? Is it because we feel like they are being exploited? These are all important concerns, but at the same time, the bigger critical doxological question, I would say, is to ask ourselves, what is the text functionally doing, not just to serve power, which is kind of the first critical theory question that people stop at. They ask that question. The answer is obvious. It works for capitalist ideology. We need go no further. And I say go beyond that and think from a sociological perspective and from an existentialist perspective, both existentialist and sociological. And that is to ask the question, what is it doing for people when someone who doesn't read nonfiction gets their hands on a text like this and feels like it's unlocking the secrets of the universe? What is that? Why is it that a person who is functionally illiterate when it comes to nonfiction is going, oh my God, there's something here? What is the something in the text that is doing that? There's a lot of different kinds of answers to that question that could be developed. I hope that one of the things you will all get a chance to do throughout this seminar is develop your own answers to those kinds of questions. And so, what is critical doxology? Well, let's take a step back and say, what's the format? Because, like I said, we've changed everything in going from Timenergy seminar to critical doxology and Timenergy seminar. Like I said, that comes from the critical media theory seminar format. Well, what is that format? It's a meeting once per month where I give a lecture and then Anne gives a lecture. And then sometimes Anne gives the lecture first and then I give the lecture. Kind of depends on how we're feeling about it, how our conversations over the preceding month have developed concerning the subject material or the subject matter. But the meeting being once a month is because we want to work with everyone's time energy, what relative time energy you actually have, and think, okay, for those kinds of courses that are, I'll say it this way. There's courses that are best done in 4 to 6 weeks. And then there's courses that are best done in something like 18 weeks. And sometimes those are best done every other week. And sometimes they're best done every week. But in both cases, I would kind of consider these as a form of binging. And then once it's over, it's over. It's kind of like, if you're watching a television show and you actually have to wait for an episode to come out every week, it's like, oh, it takes a lot longer to watch it. So it's stretching things out over time. But if it just all comes out at once, you're able to just binge it and move on to the next thing. And it's great to binge, say, Introduction to Nick Land or the Professional Managerial Class Consciousness and Ideology courses at Theory Underground. Yeah, sure. These are great short courses and you can binge them and then come back to them 6 months later for a refresher if you want. But when it comes to media, the media that we use and the media that use us, the media that mediate all information and experience of the world, with critical media theory, we thought this should be a monthly thing. This should actually be, and we've only planned it for 6 months. It was like, we'll just do it for 6 months, see how it goes doing it once per month, see if everybody falls off or not. People did not fall off. People got more out of it because it was spread out this way. And the nice thing about something like critical media theory is that the medium, say the smartphone, is something that we all are using all the time. And so, of course, it has us looped into weird, unique or singular, seemingly singular, consumer habits, niche subcultures that actually divide us. We can get into our super niche genres of music, our super niche TV show that we watch on some platform that most of the other people here probably don't even have access to that platform right now. Or I haven't gotten it yet, at least. But with critical media theory, because you're talking about the medium and not the content, talking about the form, it's actually sort of this universal. It is something that we all share. In that sense, it's like a shared positive. Of course, the negative habits we develop, the distraction that ensues, we could say that that's it. That's like the negative thing that's shared. But with Timenergy, it's similar. The fact that, except that it's instead of it being something positive, it's what we all lack. Timenergy being the thing we all lack, it means it's something we can all think about throughout the month and then bring our experiences to the table. And so the one lecture per month with CMT was meant to kind of get everybody kind of on the same wavelength, get everybody thinking with some certain reference points, say texts, and then we would return to talk about it a couple weeks later. And the discussion portion is not necessary. It's not required. The absolute necessary part, if you want to publish, on either critical doxology or Timenergy or both, if you want to publish with us, then you're probably going to want to at least do the lecture portion of these seminars. But also, I think you're probably going to get a lot out of the discussion portions if you're able to make it. They happen at the same time. Maybe we'll push it back an hour because this time is absolutely brutal for myself and Anne because we work until 1:30 a.m. last night or this morning, I guess, at Amazon. And so waking up this morning is very hard to get it all together. So we might push the discussion back. I don't know. We'll kind of like see what everybody feels about that. But the basic structure to close this portion out is that we have some theory and some common sense. American ideological common sense versus some high theory that gets read and presented that month. And then everyone gets a chance to talk about it. And then after 6 months is over, 6, give or take, might be 8 months, who knows. At some point, you as a participant are going to have an opportunity to give your own presentation. And so, for instance, Philip and Nance both gave presentations just a couple weeks ago at this time on this day, except it's the second Sunday of every month that the critical media theory cohort meets. And we've got a couple other people in that cohort preparing to present on the second Sunday of next month. But yeah, we'll be having a conversation about this normally on the third Sunday of every month. And we'll actually have people from the CMT and the CDT seminars present at the same meeting. So we might use breakout rooms if there's too many people for us all to get to talk. So we'll break into smaller groups and then we'll reconvene in a bigger group and get to talk some more because I love the breakout session thing. It's a great function on Zoom and we'll be definitely utilizing it. But to say that it's always going to be the third Sunday where we have the discussions is a problem. I don't want you to look at the schedule or the syllabus as though it's fixed. Both are provisional and subject to change. And we want to work with everybody, but we also have to kind of prioritize our lives. And so, for instance, there will be no meetings for at least none of the normal meetings will be happening during the month of May because we'll be on tour in Europe for the book tour. There will probably be some special events and you will have access to those. But it's not going to be the same times. It might not work for everybody's time. You'll at least be able to access it after the fact and you'll be able to join others who are there in conversation later. But more importantly, sometimes we'll move the discussion portion from the third Sunday to a different Sunday. Sometimes there's 5 Sundays in a month. Sometimes there's only 4. This month there were 5, which is fantastic, which means that we can all take a Sunday off next Sunday and then reconvene. So we will actually be having the discussion for CDT on the first Sunday of February. I think I've basically hit on all the points I wanted to, except to say that critical doxology is an interesting term. It turns out doxology is something that it means something to Catholics, is it not? Nod your head if you are familiar with the way the Catholic Church uses the term doxology. Well, my apologies. I did not grow up Catholic. I grew up a dirty Protestant, and we're filthy heathens, functionally illiterate, self-conceited. We know it all. We've got it all figured out. We have no tradition, right? And so I didn't know that doxology actually means anything. To me, as a philosopher, doxa means common sense. And ology means the study of. And that is exactly how I mean critical doxology. So it has nothing to do with the Catholic Church. I'm sorry. If anybody's here because they're hoping for like a substitute mass they could do over Zoom, hanging out with their friends, it's not going to happen. But the idea of critique of common sense goes hand in hand with philosophy and critical theory. And the difference between philosophy and critical theory, how I say it, is that philosophy is attempting to live the examined life and critique your assumptions, taking on the perspectives of others throughout history, right? As opposed to critical theory, which basically does that, except that instead of it's just the self, it's also on the society itself, and it's for the sake of change, right? So we don't just, through critical theory, you're not just critiquing yourself as you would with philosophy, you're actually also critiquing the society, the social order, right? And then I always say that there's 2 kinds of critical theory. There's the kind of critical theory, and both of them come from Marx, right? Marx, kind of makes critical theory what it is by taking the sort of transcendental critique, the immanent critique, the dialectical critique that is birthed in Kant and really comes to fruition in Hegel. Marx takes that, runs with it, wants to change the world with it. But then what critical theory is in Marx splits into 2 branches, and they do meet again. There are crossovers, but for the most part, there are 2 kinds of critical theory. On the one side, it's critical theory that is saying, this is what must be done. Lenin should obviously come to mind for his text of that name. On the other side is the kind of theory that says, that didn't work. Why did that not work? Back to the drawing board. What is the situation? Did we misdiagnose the social order? Did we misdiagnose the components of social change themselves? Did we forget something crucial about subjectivity or capital or class? Did we forget something about desire or drive or time energy? That's ultimately what this comes back to is that critical theory is, in conjunction with philosophy, something that gives birth to time energy theory. And so getting you kind of all on the wavelength and sort of comfortable with the usage of the term, and then kind of setting you all up to theorize it on your own, since it is something that is active in your own lives. And at the end of the day, you might disagree with how I understand it, and that's great. Ultimately, the goal is that before you disagree with my understanding of it, or before you run and do your own thing with it, you'll at least get through probably the book by that name and some of the essential texts that are in the bibliography for the research project that is going to culminate in the Time and Energy book, right? And along the way, there will be multiple books that are kind of like notes towards that theory. And, this is kind of just like the beginning, the inauguration of the project. Waypoint was kind of like a step in that direction. It had parts of my master's thesis that dealt with time energy, where I was originally working this out between and beyond Marx and Heidegger, where it ultimately comes from, which is to say critique of political economy and existential hermeneutic phenomenology. We can get into what all that means later. We don't even have to. It doesn't really matter for several months. But for right now, the last thing about the schedule is that when you see the scheduled readings, be advised that that is not always going to be the readings. That is not always going to be the actual order. So if you were to binge all the readings and think, oh, now I've got it all figured out, I don't have to do any more readings for another 6 months, you might be surprised when next month it's not the actual readings that we have on the schedule. You'll always have a month to prepare, but the current schedule should be thought of as a plan B, because I have much more difficult lectures that I want to do that I consider perhaps more important than the ones that are on the actual schedule. But it's a question of time and energy, and a question of inspiration. Inspiration gives energy, and it gives direction. And if I feel inspired over a weekend to pull together the most important stuff happening in time, labor, and social domination on abstract labor and abstract time, well, then you better bet I'm gonna get after it. I'm gonna make a bunch of notes. I'm gonna send everybody the excerpt PDF of the correct portion of this text, and then I'll say, hey, this is the plan for this month. And you'll all be like, okay, cool. Well, I hope that you think it's cool, because there are no lectures on the internet about the most important section from this text. And I wish someone had done it so that I could have, gotten access to a lot of what's in here a lot quicker. But when we're thinking about time, energy, we have to think about two separate things, or at least things that we have traditionally, habitually, throughout our entire lives, thought of as separate, and that is time and energy. And philosophers and critical theorists have traditionally thought of one or the other. The theory reading, besides obviously time energy, which is not high theory, it's kind of written between high theory and popular writing, by Adorno, called Free Time, is an amazing work. And of course, energy is implicated all the way through, but he never actually addresses it head on, and he never really brings it in. And it makes sense, because he's kind of like a guy who never really had to think about the energy component. He had his relative time energy, right? And I say relative time energy to be technically precise, because as we get through like essential portions of Waypoint and time energy, you'll all see at least the way that I've developed the theory, and you might be able to call it into question and have a problem with the way I've done it or whatever. But the way that I'm working with this is that time energy is not something individuals have. It is an existential, which is to say it's part of the existentialia in being in time, which is to say it's something not in us, but in the world, which is between us. If desire is desire of the other, if it's extimate, if you go with that Lacanian proposition, and I do, then energy doesn't just come from within us. It's not purely based on caloric intake and exercise, though obviously that's a big part of it, and we'll get into that. So energy can come from outside of us. We can be perfectly physically healthy and still not feel like we can get out of bed. Depression is, in a sort of sense, a loss of direction. Not having purpose or passion. Or if you have purpose, but passion is lacking because you're exhausted and those goals are frustrated, of course, depression will ensue. Because you know what you're called to do, but you also know it's impossible. Because doing what's required for work leaves you with nothing. Yeah. I'm ready to switch gears here and set Anne up by reading a piece that I'll say a couple things about in relation to critical doxology, and then Anne will be ready to go here in like 5 minutes. She's just eating really quick. As she goes, I'm going to eat. That's kind of how we have to do this before we rush off to work. Us juggling the fact that we're working while doing this is always going to obviously be kind of part of the game, I suppose. But, the theory wouldn't have come out of any other situation. Quick little, I guess I'll say it's like news. You all get to be the first ones to know. Slavoj Žižek wrote a preface for this book, for Timenergy. So there's going to be a new edition soon. He wrote a piece where he says that the concept itself came from the work process. Thank you. I see clapping, so I'll go ahead and hit the button here, Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Slavoj. Yeah. It's really special, the fact that he's doing that he doesn't have to. Obviously, he knows that. And it's one of those things where it's like that kind of support. It's like, it's one thing to write a preface in the sort of production mill of publishing where everybody's writing prefaces for everyone all the time. He's very good at that game. He's very much like he's like a kind, supportive colleague. So it's kind of like, it's just what he does. He's known for doing that in the world of academia. For him to slip that down here into the underground and actually go, not only is that concept important, but it comes from the very work process itself. It couldn't have come from anywhere else. And he literally says that this is where Byung-Chul Han fails to understand exhaustion and burnout. Like the fact that that's all there, it is like, I feel like I was anointed by a king to be like some kind of a knight or something, So it's really special. But I wanted to check if anybody had a quick question or comment before I read the quote that's going to ground us and prepare us for Anne's lecture. I don't think so. So I'll just say, you could also always raise your hands, especially, I don't recommend raising your hand during the middle of the lecture, unless there's something wrong with the audio or like there's a technical difficulty. But if it's nearing the end and you can tell that it's nearing the end, or if there's a transition point between my lecture and Anne's lecture, that's when to slip the hand up. All right. And so the quote I'm going to pull up here is from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's really the first page. And I think I'm just going to read a few. If anyone has a really good microphone and reading voice and wants to read from this, if they have it up in front of them, you can go for it. Nance is sadly not here. He's been having time energy issues of his own. He's been sick. He's been exhausted. His shit's all fucked up. And so he's hopefully on the mend right now because he needs to prioritize that. It's because I run him too hard on these epic marathon streams, It's like, all right. He needs to mend. All right. It starts like this. Part 1, Paradigms and Principles. The section is called Inside Out. And the quote is, There is no real excellence in all this world which can be separated from right living. This was said by someone named David Starr Jordan. Is that an obvious, does anyone know who that is? And okay, good. I figure, what if it's a famous person? I'm just revealing my cultural ignorance. I don't know. Anyway, he says, this is Covey. He's the author of 7 Habits. He says, in more than 25 years of working with people in business, university, and marriage and family settings, I have come in contact with many individuals who have achieved an incredible degree of outward success, but have found themselves struggling with an inner hunger, a deep need for personal congruency and effectiveness, and for healthy, growing relationships with other people. I suspect some of the problems they have shared with me may be familiar to you. And then he just goes through these problems. I've set and met my career goals, and I'm having tremendous professional success, but it's cost me my personal and family life. I don't know my wife and children anymore. I'm not even sure I know myself and what's really important to me. I've had to ask myself, is it worth it? Or, I've started a new diet for the 5th time this year. I know I'm overweight and I really want to change. I read all the new information, I set goals, I get myself all psyched up with a positive mental attitude and tell myself I can do it, but I don't. After a few weeks, I fizzle. I just can't seem to keep a promise I make to myself. I've taken course after course on effective management training. I'm going to skip that one, but basically the person can't be a good manager. My teenage son is rebellious and on drugs. No matter what I try, he won't listen to me. What can I do? There's so much to do, and there's never enough time. I feel pressured and hassled all day, every day, 7 days a week. I've attended time management seminars, and I've tried half a dozen different planning systems. They've helped some, but I still don't feel I'm living the happy, productive, peaceful life I want to live. I want to teach my children the value of work, but to get them to do anything, I have to supervise every move and put up with complaining every step of the way. It's so much easier to do it myself. Why can't children do their work cheerfully and without being reminded? You go down the line, he's got more and more and more. People talking about how they've worked on their personality, people talking about their relationships falling apart, their marriages going flat, this, that, the other thing. And I think at some level, if you're here, you should be able to relate. And if you don't relate, then you at least see it in people around you. If you don't relate and you see it in people around you, the chances are you might be something in a situation, a little something more like Theodore Adorno in Free Time, where he says, I don't have hobbies. He says, I understand it's a privilege, but my work, it's what I love to do, and I take it very seriously. It's not a hobby. I guess my question then is, people want to roll their eyes at this kind of literature, but where in the critical theory field are people taking these problems that are faced by almost everybody seriously? I hope that what we do here will serve as a kind of intervention, and that when Anne gives the lectures on the doxological artifacts, that we'll not just take them seriously because, hey, this matters to somebody who's going through a rough time, and so it's kind of like this default setting of ideology in America because it's where people keep coming back to. But also, maybe there's a baby in this bathwater. Maybe there's something that can actually help us. And if not, at least by understanding how to sympathize with it, understanding how to dignify it, and understanding how to allow it to intervene on theory at the same time that theory intervenes on it, that we will be able to write in a way that is more relevant to the lives of people who are being crushed under a job-centric society. Wonderful. And with that, we'll have Anne. I think she's coming up here. And then I'm just going to give her this chair and these headphones. And then at the point that she needs the whiteboard, I'll be here as her like tech guy to switch it over.
If you need more water. And I just shared my file.
Can you pull it up?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Second. Yeah. Oh. There it is.
Yeah, just give me a heads up when you need to come back.
Okay. Cool. It'll probably be sooner. Just bring the food up here. Okay. So, 7 habits of highly effective people. What is going on? Glitching out. Very sensitive. Okay. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anne. I'm Dave's wife. I've been a co-instructor at some of these courses here at Theory Underground, and like Dave mentioned, I was the co-instructor for the critical media theory course. And so the way that we divided that, Dave was kind of setting me up there, is that he would go over the more theoretically based, philosophical based text, and then my background being in social science and sociology, I would take our popular text of the month. We read Neil Postman, we read like Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, these things that have been kind of on bestseller lists and those cultural artifacts, as Dave was calling these texts, that people reach out to specifically when thinking about the struggles with technology in the modern age. And so, same thing here is I'm kind of taking charge of these more popular bestseller type texts, and we're going to look at the pros of them. I'm not necessarily explaining these things to like prescribe them and we should all do this, but there's useful things. Then with the Timenergy reading and understanding of the concept, we can kind of look at it through that lens, look at it also just through a sociological lens and go, okay, well, who does this actually apply to? Like, how is Timenergy stultification gonna limit our ability to actually achieve these things that Covey is prescribing? And that's how this is gonna go for the next however many months. Let me change my name. In order to change my name, I need to see myself. And that I can't do. I don't want to figure it out. Okay, well, you all know my name is Anna, not Dave, so Dave can fix it later. Okay, 7 habits of highly effective people. I think it should be named something else, like 7 habits of highly effective Christian businessmen, or the 7 behaviors of highly effective people as opposed to habits, or even the 7 habits of highly functional or well-rounded people. I think, you know, we were talking about how this book kind of was almost a direct response to, what was it? Ways to Influence People, that book, Dale Carnegie's book, which I know, How to Win Friends and Influence People, yeah, that one. And I think that book is a little bit more focused on, like, personality and actions, whereas this book is rooted in character versus personality. And so I think the title was maybe a way to, like, get people who, like, get that same audience, capture that same audience of the Dale Carnegie book, but it's actually not even necessarily about being effective. It's not really about habits. Like I said, it is more about lifestyle changes and behavior and reshaping the paradigm that you live your life through, as well as the word effective. I think we associate particularly with like managers and time management. And while it is about that, the book really focuses more on like building relationships and building a relationship with yourself. And so I think it is useful to his audience of kind of these like work-centric businessmen who feel like they're losing touch with their spouses and their children, and they lecture their kids all day about what's right and wrong, and their kids won't listen. And so he kind of breaks that down and says, oh, have you ever actually tried listening to your child ever a day in their life? That might actually help the relationship. And so some of it is like, okay, this is just for like assholes who are bad parents, but not necessarily. I think there's useful information within the whole book. And so, excuse me. Thinking about this with Timenergy in mind, again, this is for, you could even say that the title is for middle class or upper middle class businessmen, because in especially in the United States of America, where pretty much our entire lives are centered around work and having to work to pay our bills because everything's expensive here. I mean, Dave and I were just looking at our most recent paychecks, and it had like $200 of our paycheck taken out for taxes. Was about a quarter of the paycheck gone for taxes. It's just like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And so we're very much always thinking about our bills and what bill has to be paid next. And do we have enough money to pay that bill and buy our groceries and pay for gas in the car? And so that kind of all goes into Timenergy. So in thinking about these habits or these skills that Covey's going to put forward, they're not going to be practical all of the time for everyone. But I think this model gives us kind of a guide or a paradigm to essentialize what's important, because something that I think will come up as a theme throughout this course, as well as something that has come up in the past and was kind of a theme of the critical media theory course, is the kind of dichotomy, or I don't know what word I'm looking for right now, but the relationship between blaming the system and taking personal responsibility for our lives. And so we can go, oh yeah, we have no time energy, this sucks ass. At the same time, we have some control over the free time that we do have in our days. With critical media theory, it was, this technology is addicting and it sucks us in and we can't escape, the iPhone or Facebook or whatever. But at the same time, we do have some willpower in the matter. We do have some responsibility to take charge in how we spend our time. And so I think like the fact that you all are here on a weekend, some of you, like it's very, very late at night, like for Sue, it's like that shows that you have considered some of these things that I'm going to get into, like in Covey or just in all this kind of self-help, at least to some extent, because there's no reason for you to be here that is external. Like your boss isn't like, oh, go do this Theory Underground course and I'll give you a raise. Like we're not a merited institution here at Theory Underground. So I think I can probably confidently say that everyone here in this call, or who will be listening to this call in the future, has some internal recognition of like what their life values and principles are. And that probably revolves around the life of the mind or philosophy or self-improvement or whatever that may be. And that really is what Covey's book is about. And so he frames it he kind of sets the book up by talking about this personality ethic versus character ethic, a personality ethic, kind of, that how to win friends and influence people ethic. So self-help books that are framed through a personality ethic and through a personality paradigm are going to give you, quick tips and fixes on how to change your life, and like actual habits. Like, if you wake up every day at 5 a.m. and have a 2-hour, morning routine where you do this, that, and the other. I know that's kind of the like hustle grind male, like when you see what's pushed self-help wise in the media, like the male message, I think, is that get up 5 a.m. Billionaires get up at 5 a.m. and they go on a 5-mile run, like Goggins or whomever else. And then I think the same kind of thing is pushed towards women, like have an early morning, get up, eat a healthy breakfast, do your skincare. It's like, do these things, do these actions, versus the character ethic is more focused on like who you are, how you're going to be versus how you're going to act. your goals and your principles. He distinguishes between values versus principles. Principles being more like, he's very religiously based in this book, and it usually doesn't hinder the argument, but there are times, like in the very end, he's like, I think at the end of the day, we all just need to, live for God. And it's like, okay, bro. But, so I think to him, principles are maybe more religious or Christian focused principles, but they're kind of like these social rules or, guiding rules or guiding values that we all have and that we can all share. So maybe that's, integrity or honesty or loyalty, things that we can kind of all agree are, for all of human history, if we look at like the oldest texts of philosophy, they're going to have these principles that still ring true today. Whereas values, the way that he distinguished values is he said, oh, well, like a violent motorcycle gang they're all going to have a shared value, but maybe their shared value is like robbery and murder. So that's kind of the difference between values and values and principles to him. And so he focuses more on principles, but we can kind of use like personal values in reference to principles kind of interchangeably. I think we can all assume like no one here values murder and robbery and all the bad things. And so with that as kind of how he sets up the book, living our life with principles and thinking about our life paradigm. So paradigm being how we see the world, how we live our life. Hold on, I lost my mouse here. Yeah, how we see the world and how we live. And so he references this to like a map. Like our paradigm is kind of the map that we have of our life. And so it's character ethic, it's life paradigms. And so he argues that all of his habits, all of his behavioral suggestions are through a principle-centric paradigm. So the way that we live our life is not through any one, like, oh, I'm a spouse-centric paradigm where I just live for my spouse, or I'm a family-centric paradigm, I just live for my family, or I'm money-centric paradigm. All of those things can be taken into consideration of your personal values, and then you live your life through those principles. And so that's gonna, include your spouse and your family and money and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm gonna just kind of remind us all of what those 7 habits are. And there's a couple that I'll really focus on that relate, I think, particularly well to Timenergy, and especially those for chapter 1 and chapter 5 that Dave had us read from Timenergy. So the first habit, the first behavior that he suggests is to be proactive, meaning basically be responsible for your own life. And I think with most personal change and personal growth, that is just the starting point. Like, no one can change their life unless they take responsibility and actually choose to change their life. It's like my dad has been overweight like my entire life of knowing him. And my mom would always be like, oh, I just wish Dad would lose some weight. And we'd always kind of, hey, let's do this, let's do that. Nothing ever changed. In the last, about a year ago, he found out that he had diabetes. He was diabetic. And that was his, I need to take responsibility now. So us pushing him, or us as his kids or as his wife or even his own, like, oh yeah, I'll be healthy this year. He was never actually taking that responsibility and taking charge. It was like, he had this kind of aha moment of, oh shoot, I gotta get this in check. And so he completely changed his whole lifestyle and was literally able to kick the diabetes without insulin or any medical intervention. So that was awesome. And so really being proactive is just taking the being responsible for making things happen in your life, being responsible for how you react to situations, especially when thinking about relationships. This book, a lot of his examples are rooted in relationships, particularly with a spouse, with children, or with coworkers or employees under you. Like, he's kind of writing as if you're a manager almost. And so that's kind of the basis. And I think, yeah, when thinking about that in reference to time energy, in those times that we have free, and when thinking about our week, our week with energy infused blocks of time with potential for repetition that none of us have, but we can, to some extent, be responsible for our week while giving ourselves grace and recognizing, oh, like, I'm tired. I don't have the energies. Like, Dave and I had such a hard time waking up this morning because, like he said, we were at work until like midnight last night, in bed around 1:30. And so kind of trying to find a balance between like taking that responsibility, but also being proactive, and then just like recognizing when I cannot do it right now. It's like, Nance is not here. Nance is always here. Nance is like, I cannot right now. Habit number 2 is beginning with the end in mind. And so this is going to be living a goal-oriented life versus a task-oriented life. So thinking about our personal mission, our personal values, our personal principles and goals, and living in a way that aligns with those and allows us to focus on those goals rather than all the little other things that we think about. And so I think what was really useful with this one that I think can be useful in thinking about how we can harness our free time and our free energy in a busy life, in a busy capitalist-centric, work-centric life, especially here in the United States, is having some sort of personal mission statement. So whether you actually like literally write down a personal mission statement like you're a company, or you make yourself a vision board with images and pictures, or have conversations about it with your spouse or your friends or whomever, understanding your values and like who you are and the person that you're trying to be and that you're trying to become, and what matters to you in your life is going to help give some direction towards what you do with that time, so it doesn't just become garbage time or distracted time wasted on technology or social media. And so again, like looking at you all, it's like I can imagine that you all care about the life of the mind or philosophy. Maybe that's part of your personal mission, is becoming better in some capacity related to thought and thinking and philosophy. And so here you are. You're not sitting watching Netflix shows right now. You're not at the gym. You're here right now, and that's really awesome. And so yeah, just kind of understanding our centers, understanding our missions is going to help us harness some of that energy a little bit. But I think this one relates really well to the third habit, which I think is the most important. It's one that I know Dave has talked about a lot. Like, he introduced this idea to me a couple of years ago. And I think it relates really well to time energy, and particularly in thinking about, again, like ways that we can harness our limited time energy while also looking at it through like that structural lens of, okay, well, where does this like work-centric capitalist system literally not allow for this to happen, and where we spend our time. But this is when I'm going to switch over to the board here and draw a little graph or chart for you all. This habit is called put first things first. So it's all working.
Yeah, let me get you your microphone set up here. Your mic will be live in 3.
Okay, hope this mic should be working. Dave's changing the camera. Am I super white over here? The light need to be turned down. Okay, Dave's got me. Okay, so put first things first. Thinking about what is urgent in your life and what is important, and in thinking about all the things that we have to do in any given day and any given week, is looking at this chart of urgent versus important. Urgent. We've got urgent. That's the worst marker, by the way. Let's do the black. We've got urgent. This is our symbol for not, so not urgent. And then we've got important and not important. Trying to understand this particular chapter was a struggle for me. I've always been a very logistically oriented person. I've always been a very to-do list oriented person. I'm constantly thinking about any given day in my life or week in my life is, okay, what are all the things I have to do? And I have a hard time conceptualizing, okay, but what is actually urgent and important? What is actually important and not urgent? What is not urgent and not important that I'm wasting my time on? And so this one was tough for me to conceptualize, because it's to me, everything belongs in the urgent and important category. And if I don't check off every single thing on my to-do list today that I've kind of randomly prescribed, then I failed the day and I'm a failure and I'm wasting my life away. And that's been my life for the last 20 years. But I think this gives some clarity in thinking about, again, how we do spend our time outside of work. And so I'm thinking about these 4 categories: urgent, important, not urgent. The things that are going to go in the important and urgent category are going to be things like crises and emergencies. Like pressing problems. Like if you've got a leak in your house and that is going to cause a flood soon, okay, that takes precedence. Pressing, if you're a parent, I know that if you're a parent or if you have pets or if you have someone who is dependent on you, that's kind of gonna impact this grid here and what goes in what category. If your kid is sick, if you're in the middle of a work call and your kid's like, mommy, I need you, daddy, I need you, it's okay, that probably takes precedence. But then in important and urgent, deadlines are gonna play into this one. And we could probably say bill deadlines, money. It's okay, especially in this culture, if I don't pay my rent, I'm evicted. So that's pretty important and urgent. More urgent the closer you get to the deadline. But that's kind of going to be in here. Urgent but not important. This was when I was telling Dave, I was I don't know what goes in that category. But that's going to be things like interruptions. So maybe your kid comes up to you and says, Daddy, I want to show you something right now. And it's okay, that's urgent. Depending on what the thing is they want to show you, it's important if you're trying to, build a relationship with your child. So maybe there's a way of saying, hey, I super want to see what you want to show me. Can you wait? Which I know is not always possible depending on the age of your child. Some phone calls are going to be urgent, but not important. Some emails, some meetings. And then popular activities. Specifically thinking about popular movies that are out. It's Oscar season, and so I think there's probably a cultural sense of urgency of, if I want to be in on the cultural narrative, I gotta see all the movies so I know, why did Barbie get snubbed and why is everyone mad about it? That can fit into this. Under not important and not urgent, that's gonna be our time wasters, text, Instagram, movies, Netflix, pleasant recreation, which are not necessarily a bad thing. Again, in thinking about wanting to, be in with the culture, go see the latest movie that came out, spend some time on Facebook, see what the relatives are up to. Not a bad thing in of itself. But what Covey points out is that we typically spend majority of our time up here in urgent versus important. So we're constantly just responding to the next emergency, responding to the next crisis. Or we're spending our time in things that are urgent but not important. I gotta respond to this email. I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And then more recently, and this kind of goes hand in hand with our critical media theory cohort, is We're spending our time in the category of things that are not important and not urgent, spending our time online, wasting our time on screens, scrolling, but where a principle-centered life, principle-centered paradigm should be focusing in, according to Covey, is this important but not urgent category. So that's going to be things like maybe prevention of disease, prevention of illness, prevention of your car breaking down. That's what you would categorize as being in that category. But more particularly is your principle-focused activities. Activities. So if creativity is really important to you, then actually scheduling time to practice your art. If music is really important to you, having time to practice your instrument. Philosophy and theory is important to you. Scheduling blocks of time in your week to read Heidegger, to read that text, come to these meetings. Relationships are going to go in this category. So, calling your parents, calling your siblings, checking in on your friends, because to him, that's kind of is more important in a principle-centered life, and that's what's going to give our lives meaning, not, oh, did I respond to these work emails? Exercise in this category, and really just anything that kind of counts as leisure in the way that it's used in chapter 5 of Timenergy, not just like, oh, I'm going on a leisurely scroll, but like leisure in the way that school used to be leisure in the way that makes our lives better, helps build meaning into our lives, and builds us up as a person who can think our own thoughts and be creative and do projects. And for not every person is going to, value like philosophy and reading Heidegger as their leisure activity that gives their life structured meaning. For some people it's dance, for some people it's cooking, but really to Covey it's prioritizing the important and not urgent category. And so this is where, and I know this doesn't work for everyone, and it's something that I've tried, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but like blocking out your week and using physical, whether it's a Google Calendar or a written planner, or you just write it down on a piece of paper, but conceptualizing your week and putting, okay, I've got work, got work on Mondays, 2 Wednesdays, Friday, like I got work Tuesday, Thursday, 9 to 5, Monday, Wednesday, or Monday through Friday. And then using like calendar blocking essentially to kind of fill in the rest of the time. Okay, well, Saturday morning, my kids go to their gymnastics class, so I can, implement a 3-hour window to read Heidegger. I can, wake up at 6 a.m. and every day and go on my workout because that is important to me. And so he's really emphasizes like, just plan it into your week to do this. And that's kind of where, again, it's the reason I struggle with it is because I go, I planned my week so perfectly. I filled in every little slot of time with something productive to do. I even scheduled a time to have a reading session. But then by the time you get there, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm starving. I didn't have time to make actually a substantial meal, and I'm tired, and whoops, I took a 4-hour nap. So there's really never any mention of that in the book. Rightfully so, because we don't want to like set ourselves up for failure, but I think going into it with this understanding can give us some grace while trying our best to prioritize important and not urgent. So we're not spending all of our time in these other things while also going, okay, if I'm tired, I'm going to scroll on Instagram a little bit. But for now, I'll switch back to the computer camera. Sweet. And then I think yeah, I'm wrapping here. The next 3 habits are really more about relationship building, and particularly, again, thinking about like business relationships. Those are where most of his examples lie. But it's think win-win, seek first to understand, then to be understood, and synergize. So think win-win is just this idea that, like, in a lot of business settings or even settings or in relationships, we sometimes go in like, I have to win, I have to get my way. And he's saying, no, try to go in where everyone gets their way. Okay, great. Good advice, thanks. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Again, this one's particularly kind of aimed at like these fathers who just like think, why is my wife like this? Why are my children like this? Like, why won't they just listen to me? And it just basically says, oh, have you ever listened to them? And then the father's like, oh, no, I haven't. And he's like, okay, well, if you listen to them and just hear them for what they're saying, the relationship will be better. Okay, great. Thanks. This whole chapter, he goes into like empathetic listening, and kind of gives some strategies, which it seems very like trivial the way that he sets this up. It's like, okay, if your son comes to you and says, oh man, dad, I hate school. I don't want to go to school anymore. It's so scripted and just like oh, I'm hearing you don't want to go to school. Yeah, dad. I mean, I don't not like just the way he sets it up is really interesting. But again, there's important things in thinking about our relationships, whether it's with spouse, child, coworkers. This idea of synergize is, oh, hold on. Synergy kind of has the word energy in it, not necessarily in relation to like time energy, but just like an energy between two people. And so it's this idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so it's just kind of the whole chapter about like being in sync with the people you interact with, being in sync with your partner, being in sync with your family, being in sync with your coworkers. That's synergy. So useful chapters in thinking about relationships for his particular audience, especially. But chapter 7 is where we can kind of tie it all back in. And this habit is called sharpen the saw. So, it's about balanced self-renewal, and similar to this kind of chart of the important, not important, he says there's really 4 dimensions of self-renewal that would fall into the important and not urgent category, that if we implement these things every week, they're going to give us a balanced life. And it's something that I know that Dave has really been talking a lot about in the last few months, just this idea of balance. And well, what does it mean to be a full human being? Back in the day, like when we didn't have to work so much and we weren't so focused on making money to pay the bills, and when we had like more time, energy, you could do it all. You really could do it all. You could raise families and children and have a house and go to the community meeting and exercise. Like you could do it all. And that's kind of like, that's why there's so much going on at Theory Underground at any given time. Language meetings, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, and we're doing these meetings with Eamon, Swole about physical health, is because that's truly what being a human should be about, is living this balanced life. And so to Covey, there's 4 dimensions of this self-renewal practices that we can have in any given week that will make our lives better, sharpen our saw, keep us, in tip-top shape. And those are the mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual, right? So physical, exercise, nutrition, health, stress management. Those social and emotional are going to be basically friends and family, maybe therapy. Spiritual, for him, it's going to be church and religion, but that's not necessarily going to be everyone's spiritual. Maybe it's meditation, it's prayer, maybe it's just more value clarification and focusing on and trying to understand your personal mission statement. And then that mental dimension, so reading, writing, your passions, sharpening your mind, to create that balanced life. And this kind of goes into, there's a concepts that we talk about in the course that Dave and I are teaching at a university called Is College Worth It? And it's this idea of being a multi-potentialite. So having, rather than honing in on one specific skill, the way that kind of the university nowadays pushes students and pushes out the liberal arts and this idea of being a well-rounded interdisciplinary student. It's no, if you're a business student, you should only be taking business classes. And so they go in with this attitude that anything that's not business is just a waste of my time because I just care about business. But it's like, well, no, you don't. You care about a lot of things. And so it's this idea that we can be good at or even just care about and practice many different things in our lives. Multi-potentiality, lots of potential in, all these different areas. And that's kind of where the structural stultification of our time energy hinders this desire that a lot of us have to be a multi-potentialite. Because, if I want to do theater and read philosophy and be a good cook and be a good family member and take care of my cat, when? When is that going to happen? And so Covey's book is very much an idealistic framework for upper middle class people who maybe have a single income household, who one partner doesn't have to work at all, or where it's just 40 hours and a solid income and we can afford a vacation to Europe every year. But again, thinking about these doxological artifacts, you can see why this would resonate with people, particularly people who feel like maybe their relationships and all facets of their life are falling apart. And we can implement some of these things while also giving ourselves some grace because of lack of time energy. And I know it's something I struggle with every day. And literally, I was mad at myself yesterday for sleeping until 9 a.m. because I went to bed at 2 a.m. And it's like, that's not good. I should understand that that's not necessarily my fault. But it's all complicated, and it's all just good things to think about as we go forward. And so with that is my presentation on 7 Habits. I highly recommend listening to the book, reading it, even just skimming through the PDF because it has a lot of interesting and useful graphics. Whoa. And we will switch back over to Dave. Thank you.
Actually, maybe that might start turning off.
Okay, when it starts turning off.
All right, so Anna will be back downstairs, listening from down there until the camera starts overheating, which could happen, might not happen. Yeah, so that's pretty much how this goes down, right? This is pretty much what we do, and then normally I do a full lecture. All right. I'm still doing a lecture on the time energy portion of this, but I won't call it a full lecture because the syllabus and schedule talk happened, and it matters, and I'm trying to remember that it matters because sometimes I do kind of skip over it, but there's a lot of expectation setting and sort of grounding work that is necessary. And though I hate syllabus day at college, that doesn't mean that I should forget about those sort of common expectations that do need to be set. But I also want to apologize about the schedule. I just discovered that the wrong date was shown on the syllabus for today. It was showing the 29th instead of the 28th. So at least one person who would have been here probably wasn't able to be here. When in doubt, make sure it's the 4th Sunday, unless we send a special email saying otherwise. But I'm going to get right to it and switch cameras over here for you all so you're able to see the whiteboard.
That microphone is not on yet if you were under the assumption that it is.
Thank you. Now we're good, right? That's good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, what I was saying was that you have to move that red box on that camera manually every time. So, welcome everybody to the virtual classroom at Theory Underground. This is a new thing. I try to switch between this lecture microphone and my notes versus the whiteboard and the red microphone, but usually I end up just on the red microphone because it's too much to switch between things. It would be nice to have a little lapel mic and not have to worry about it, but this is all a work in process. We're working with what we have. This microphone was donated to me by my buddy Chris, who works at an urban mining depot, meaning that when people donate their sort of outdated technology, he's the one who sorts through it, repurposes it, etc. This used to be a judge's microphone in a courthouse. I was probably sentenced to some, juvenile probation or something off of this microphone, so that's funny. But I want to touch on a couple of things here before really getting into Timenergy. And that is to say that Anne's talk, first of all, for real.
I'm trying to.
Thank you. It really was. Everyone was stoked that you were able to do that, Anne. That was fantastic. And it couldn't have come about. I love the way that you did focus on point number 3, which is this time management thing. Now, there's a lot of different time management strategies. There's a lot of different books on the topic. I've looked into a few of them. My sense is that they're all kind of similar. They're all going to kind of help you with this. If anybody has a recommended, better one, then do let me know. Of course, you can always say hey, something so important, some awesome way of making the difference between urgent and important. And it's hard sometimes to know what's what and what goes where. Practical advice is awesome. We're always looking for it. We're not against it. But a couple of my points that I wanted to touch on here was, first of all, did anyone pick up on Anne's Freudian slip? Did anyone pick up on it? It was when she said leisurely stroll, but what she actually said was leisurely scroll. That's a good one. That's a fucking good one, right? Because that is exactly what we've replaced the leisurely stroll with, is the leisurely scroll. And of course, that scroll is not leisurely. It is not in a space that is safe for leisure. Leisure, which was defined by Adorno in this month's reading as unconstrained and comfortable. He says you have free time, but you don't have leisure time. Do you? Is your free time unconstrained and comfortable? Chances are that your so-called leisure time, your so-called free time, is consumed by the things that I'm pointing at in this important and urgent box, or what's going on down here in this not important and not urgent box. And I want to be a little bit more sympathetic to ourselves, and did touch on being sympathetic to ourselves. So, it's not that she didn't touch on it, but it's just that by saying time wasters, we do leave out that recreation is necessary. It's necessary labor. Right? And that's one of the things that I love so much about Adorno's piece. He goes after the recreation industry. But because he's a Marxist, when he says the recreation of labor power, and he spells it just the way we say recreation, he exposes the secret in this term. I never thought about recreation as recreation of labor power. I read that same piece probably 5 times up to this point. I've read the free time piece. It was this morning that it clicked for me, that I was like, because I was always like the recreation of labor power, and I just kept reading. And of course I got the message. I got the memo. I understood at a gut level, very intuitively. It makes a lot of sense. What he's talking about is that free time is time for resting and recharging. Of course, I understand that. Everyone understands that. And if you read the piece, that comes through. And we get that it's heteronymous because it's necessary. Think about it. It's not just preparation for work in the sense of your body has to heal.
from doing the monotonous bullshit that it was doing the whole time. Like right now, my knees hurt from work last night, right? It's not just resting. It's also stealing your mind and psyching yourself up to get back to it. The hardest kinds of jobs, the ones that create the most burnout at the level of mental, emotional, social, and what we could call spiritual levels of human existence, are probably professional managerial class kinds of gigs, because they require showing up in a whole other way. I show up to Amazon, I put my secret earbud in, and I'm fucking disassociating. I am not there. Anne sees me, because we started working the same shift within the last few weeks here. And Anne sees me and I'm always like, because she knows exactly what I'm doing. But it's just like, I'm off in la la land. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, academically, whatever. I'm not there unless I'm doing field research, unless I'm talking to my fellow employees because I'm actually interested in how they manage their time and their energy, what other kinds of jobs they've worked. I'm asking sociological, existential kinds of questions, right? But outside of the work that I'm doing for my own book that I'm writing there, off the toilet on my notes app, there are, there's the physical. And the fact is that even the professionals and managers of capital, they also have to exhaust their bodies, but in different ways. It is exhausting to sit at a computer all day. It is exhausting. You know, yesterday when I sat down in the lunchroom, I walked all the way across the warehouse so that I could spend half of my break with Anne before it was over, and then I had to walk all the way back, okay? But when I sat down in that chair, it felt about as good as taking my shoes off when I get home. It was like, oh, yeah, which is the opposite of when you are a professional or a manager or a white collar worker and you've been sitting in that chair all day. And so then we wonder, why is it that the people who are riding bicycles everywhere on these like $2,000 bicycles, why are they all white collar workers? Well, the answer should be obvious. They've been sitting too much. They need it's different, right? Like there is this level of labor power where it's like, it is kind of like a battery, right? There is like basic caloric intake and rest that goes into the recreation of your labor power. Now you're like charged up again, and then you go back to work and then your charge goes out. This kind of energy is somehow separate from the fact that you could be fully rested, but not be able to get out of the bed because your higher aspirations have been so frustrated that you're depressed now. So we almost have to talk about two energies. I'm just going to go ahead and put a big question mark on that. Mikey's the one that put me onto this. Mikey's there in the camera off, but he's here. No, now he's listening from YouTube. Okay. Well, but he'll be in and out throughout these seminars. But Mike is the one who put me on to the idea of two energies, because I've been trying to understand exhaustion and the energy of time energy in terms of Lacanian psychoanalysis and libido for a long time. It's taken a long time because Lacan's not the easiest guy to understand, right? But Mikey started teaching me Lacan in 2020. That's where I got him to do a bunch of introductory talks on my channel. That's where a lot of people first got introduced to his work. It took me a lot of working Mikey as his sort of like agent to get him to kind of come out of his little den and actually speak on camera. But I always just thought it would be important because I know how he snaps into gear once he knows he's giving a real lecture, right? Well, time energy theory comes out of the conversations I've had with him. But prior to that, it comes out of a decade of work in the labor force before I went to college. It comes out of my reading of Estranged Labor by Marx, and that clarifying for me a million things that had resulted in me blaming myself or others. right? And that's to say that I had suffered such severe burnout from trying to do self-help things to get my life together. And that burnout was not just exhaustion. It was not just depression. It was a lot of other stuff that put me into a hospital. My entire life fell apart. This is all back in 2011. Trying to succeed as a wage laborer while listening to the self-help materials in these so-called nonfiction works written by and for white-collar people, kind of assuming that their life is the same as my life, and me trying to live up to not just their expectations, but also adapt to and live a principle-based life that was prioritizing my values and principles on the good advice of these people, led to extreme collapse. The most extreme collapse I've ever imagined. I mean, I couldn't imagine more extreme collapse than I experienced. And so when I finally gave up on life, I decided, well, what's better than offing myself? I guess I could just go into debt and go to college. And so, because in my community, I wouldn't say that I had much of a community, but I would say that where I'm from, like my neck of the woods, nobody goes to college, right? And if they do, they talk it down because most people don't go to college. The discourse is why college doesn't matter. So it's kind of fascinating that now I'm in a class with freshman students and we're talking about, does college matter? Because I come from a background where it doesn't. And the main reason it doesn't is not just, it's liberal brainwashing. There is obviously some of that. There's a lot of kinds of brainwashing. It's a lot more invisible in terms of the invisible syllabus than what you get at the level of explicit ideology. But there's a lot of brainwashing, sure, within the schooling system, within the university. Absolutely. I mean, that's not to say that there's not brainwashing in my neck of the woods either. But the biggest reason people had a problem with college is because of the debt that they know they would have to go into. Because in my neck of the woods, people know they would have to go into debt because they don't have parents who are going to pay for their college, right? They're living in trailers out in the woods. When I say my neck of the woods, it's like that is a Midwestern expression used to mean my neighborhood. But I also did grow up in the woods at some point. My parents, they had me in the city, but then they moved to the woods at some point, right? And so I've kind of lived in that dichotomy. And when I pretty much ran away from home and started my life as a troubled youth, working wage labor jobs, shitty, entry level, low skill, as they say, I was, like I said, functionally illiterate, hadn't learned to read until 12, hadn't read nonfiction up to this point. My schooling had been null. Like the schooling, it's like with regular schooling, there's a lot of crazy kinds of stuff that happens in a regular schooling environment. There's a lot of ideology and assumptions that get kind of programmed into people there. But I would have preferred that over the sort of deschooling my parents tried to do with their homeschooling, because it wasn't even proper deschooling, according to, like, say, Ivan Illich or Paulo Freire. It was not radical, and it was not, it wasn't like, oh, we're going to destructure so that we're like anti-capitalist. It was more like, they're like, no, we're going to do structure and we're going to do it better than the schooling system. But then also, because we have no time or energy and we have so many things we have to do, we're not going to be able to hold you accountable to those structures. And so then it's like, there's always the structure, but then no accountability. And so I just cheated my way through school. I didn't have to read, ran away from home because I couldn't stand the whole situation. It was very dysfunctional. And I don't normally go into this much personal detail, but I think it's an important preface to what we're going to be getting into here, because I kind of want to say that what's going on in 7 Habits is not just that we ultimately need some guidance, we ultimately need some ideas, we ultimately need some wisdom or whatever. It's also that people who really latch onto it, they don't have structure and they don't have accountability and they don't have guidance. And so when someone says, oh yeah, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, it's just like that dad talk. It's just like, sit down, son, I'm going to tell you, this is how to be. And people kind of scoff at that idea. The kind of people who scoff at that idea have at least had the luxury or privilege, I assume, of dad talks. But if your dad had to leave before sunup and didn't come home until after sundown, self-help might actually be filling that void because you never actually had those conversations. And if your dad tried, he's not an intellectual, or he didn't go to college. And so the thing about someone like Covey is the guy's at least got an education. Like, my whole thing is like, wow, my dad really should have read this. I remember it was on the bookshelf at my house growing up, but I don't think he ever had the time or energy to read it. And if he had read it, I think he would have tried to implement a few of these things. Like I know it's corny, but like understanding first, like trying to understand where your kid's coming from. There was nothing like that in my entire upbringing. That it like makes me want to cry, like thinking like, oh my God, such a corny piece of advice could have actually been a powerful, impact on my entire home life situation. Same with this kind of time management schema. Like, I have maybe 2 memories of going fishing with my dad and 1 memory of snowboarding. And that was on my 12th birthday. But at that point, I already didn't have a relationship with him, right? By the time your kid's going through puberty, it's a little late to establish a relationship. So yeah, I'm talking from my personal standpoint, but my personal standpoint is a universal standpoint for people whose parents don't have time energy, who are constantly working, which is not just people in poverty. That includes people who are the children of millionaires, probably billionaires. Let's be honest. We just got through watching the 4th season of Succession, and Logan Roy, the media mogul billionaire father, does not have relationships with his kids. Or if he has relationships, you would just characterize them as extremely dysfunctional. Well, why is that? Because he always used money to do the work for him in the relationship. And what time energy theory is ultimately supposed to get to for us is to show us that there are things that money can't buy. There are things that money cannot buy that only time energy can get us. And a lot of the things in this not urgent, but important sector or quadrant count as that. In fact, I would say that all of these renewal activities, insofar as they really matter, count as that. These renewal activities, mental, physical, emotional, social, spiritual. Yeah, you can pray and meditate in small little 5-minute, I'm just going to step aside really quick and do a prayer. Okay. That is not the life of devotion. You have to get into a different headspace for things that require devotion. Think about trying to read when you are studying something and you lose track of time because you are in this space of devotion, whether it's something spiritual or not, it doesn't matter. It's devoted time. You are devoted to the task at hand. And the devotion to the task at hand has taken so much priority in the situation that you are not aware of the clock. Versus you're constantly in a state of what Heidegger would call time reckoning. Time reckoning, vis-a-vis the clock, right? You're counting the pages in the book. The moment you're counting the pages in the book, you're already fucked. There is no way that you're going to be able to get as much out of this reading session as if you were able to detach from counting time, counting pages, right? The moment you're reading pages and you're counting time, it's like you are watching the toaster, waiting for the toast to pop, and you're on your way to work. Hey, you were in the flow, everything's happening. You're like, oh, I'm going to make some toast. So you put it in the toaster, and now you're watching it. Or even better, you're waiting for the water to boil with the tea kettle. Everybody knows that, phenomenologically speaking, you can't watch the tea kettle. nothing will make time last longer. It almost makes me think maybe the right way to read books would be, instead of watching the clock, you put the tea kettle on and you watch the tea kettle as you read. You'd end up reading, like, I don't know, 50 pages, and you'd forget all about the page numbers, because for some reason time expands when you are anticipating the tea kettle boiling, right? There are these weird little things like that that hopefully we'll be able to develop into some kind of, I don't want to say science, something like that maybe. Let me let Mikey here in, and then I'm going to give Anne the co-host privileges so that she is able to let anyone else in who tries to get in, so I don't have to. And then I'm going to bring it back around here by saying that debt is the reason people scorn college where I come from, right? I was talking about that. So I just want to close that idea out. It's a kind of suicide debt, which means that for where I'm from, things have to go very, very bad in order to go into debt. You know, there are kinds of debt that you can go into that make you money. But those are the kinds of loans and those are the kinds of investments that nobody in my neck of the woods ever had access to, right? And so, you know, that's fair. If you have access to them, take advantage of that to the fullest extent. Would hate to see you waste your life away. But I was already wasting my life away. Self-help was not helping. It would get me really excited. I would think, I see a future here. I see a way out. And then I would apply the principles and I would go as hard as I could, and I would just inevitably burn out. And these various ways of burning out or falling off track eventually wrecked my life, right? And so there was no solution. There was no grand solution to this, but it was going to college and saying, I've resigned myself to the kind of debt that I'll probably never pay off. And I might off myself after it's over, but at least I have delayed the inevitable. I went in with that mindset. It's kind of gruesome to think about, like, that I went in literally with this, like, well, it's now or later. And, you know, I'm single. My debt won't affect anybody else. So if I were to just off myself at the end of all of this, it won't matter. Having that kind of desperation going into college made me take it very seriously. But where I come from, nobody takes it seriously, right? And at first I go for a practical degree, but there were electives that I had to take anyway. And so I decided to prioritize my electives in the first semester. And that's why I took philosophy. And I got really into philosophy. I got really into psychology. I really liked my English class. I hated my math class because I had remedial math because I cheated my way through school. You can cheat your way through English if you have a basic sense for the language. And I'd been listening to enough audiobooks at that point that I had a basic sense for the language. I could bumble my way through tests and still come out with an A. But maybe that's just because the standards have been lowered so much. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But math, you can't really lie. You can't really cheat. Like, at a certain point, like, it's the proof is in the pudding. I had to put in the work. Well, it was with philosophy, though, that I discovered something. And that was that the kinds of questions that had always kept me up at night, that nobody else took seriously, there were spaces for this. There were people in a tradition who had been grappling with these things and somehow I'd been derived of that, right? If my parents had been rich conservatives instead of poor conservatives, it's likely I would have had, you know, some Greek myth and philosophy prior to, you know, I would have probably had at least my classical philosophers, right? Maybe even some scholastics, maybe. But there's this, sort with poor conservatives, it's like, it's the Bible, it's the Bible, it's the Bible. There's nothing else. It's the one book. They don't even have the time and energy for that book, but it's the one book, right? And so for me, I was like, oh my God, what is this philosophy thing? Who's this Socrates guy? What is going on with Aristotle? But it was even better than that because I wasn't just in a philosophy class. I was in a political philosophy class, meaning that It was Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Politics, Machiavelli's The Prince, Thomas Hobbes' The Leviathan, the whole book with each of these. Because the guy teaching this course was just like, you got to read primary texts. And you actually have to read. And so this was transformative for me, but it wouldn't have been transformative for me without two things. One, him actually saying, you can't blow smoke up my ass. I know you didn't really read it. And giving me an F on my first written response, right? So it's like the second week or whatever, like he has everybody write on a piece of paper, answers to questions from the reading. I sat there and wrote it all out. He gives me an F and I was like, how in the world did I get an F? Like I said, you can bullshit your way through an English class. All of a sudden he's acting like philosophy is math. I was like, what the heck? I thought this was my opinion. He's like, no, it's not your opinion. You have to actually show me that you read it. And I'm not seeing that you read it. Well, that was one of the big things. The other thing was the actual relative time energy that I had because I was going into debt. And because I was living for free. Due to a special circumstance, there was a friend of a friend of a friend, or like my mother's friend of a friend, who had a place right off campus at North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And she needed help. And so I would make her oatmeal every morning. And I got to live in her basement for free. And I would walk outside the house and I could see campus. And so then I didn't need a car. So I sold my car. And so I was able to cut corners on my expenses. If it wasn't for cutting corners on my expenses and going into debt and still having to work part-time, then I wouldn't have had the relative time energy to actually take philosophy seriously. But that's only a necessary condition. There is also another necessary condition, and that is potential recognition. And this is a sort of conversation or argument I've had with Mikey. At some point, he'll hopefully give a guest lecture here and we'll get into it. But I'm just going to put it on this. I think that potential recognition is somehow like a component of time energy. And so I symbolize it with a diamond and an R and a dot in the center of the R. And the dot in the center of the R is recognition. That is an eyeball in the R for recognition. It's supposed to be a very intuitive symbol. And the diamond is for modal logic. It means possible. So potential, possible, it's close enough for me. Well, I'm saying that potential recognition, and then I will say relative time energy. Now, this is the symbol for time energy here. It's just a lowercase e with a line through it. That line through it kind of makes a T. So you have like the T and the E. It came about by accident because at the time that I started really thinking about time energy, from my standpoint, it started out with thinking this is the existential way of thinking about labor power, but over time it developed to realizing it's the precondition for what becomes labor power. So that's a distinction we can get into eventually. I'm using this is this called the tilde? Yeah, I'm using the tilde. Now in modal logic, or just any logic actually, the tilde can mean negation, but it can also mean approximation. And I use this symbol for negation. So, which is like an angle, a squared angle, right? So I want to get this correct, because we're going to develop a sort of existential symbolic logic for time energy theory. That's one of the goals here. Well, the squared angle is always going to be negation, and this wiggly tilde is always going to be approximation. And so I always say relative time energy. Now, it's important to say relative time energy because having time throughout your week that is repeatable and having energy is not a condition. That's not sufficient conditions for having time energy. And even if you had it all figured out and you were able to, play musical instruments and do weight training and practice jujitsu and study philosophy and teach lectures like I want to be able to do, if you had your relative time energy together so that you could actually do that, it still wouldn't be time energy in this sort of absolute sense. And the absolute sense is because it is communal. Time energy, and I was saying this earlier, as I've conceived it, it is a communal resource. It's an existential, meaning it's not in us, it's between us, which is to say that individuals or capitalist subjects are not a sufficient condition for being able to have time energy in the first place because they've been individualized. Now, you can still kind of approximate it. We can still talk about our relative time energy when we are speaking loosely. But the idea is that in a society where everybody else has been transformed into labor power, before birth probably, but at least through the schooling system and their, work-life balance since then, people have been transformed into labor power. If you were to say get laid off, or you don't have to go to work anymore because you're not considered an essential worker and COVID's going on, in that situation, and you're going, oh my God, I have all this free time, but I'm not able to do anything. Well, yeah, because you are a product. You are a commodity. You are sitting on the shelf in the marketplace. And just because people don't want to buy you right now, or people aren't allowed to buy you right now, doesn't change the fact that psychically, libidinally, all the way through to your bones, you are part of the standing reserve, what Heidegger calls Gestell. He calls that Bestand. You're part of the Bestand, the standing reserve of labor power. You are human resources. You're not an actualized human being. You're definitely not Theodore Adorno, which is to say, he's got his relative time energy. And he's able to, because he has relative time energy, therefore spend his time in a way that is what he would call leisure. Time energy is the precondition for having leisure. It's also the precondition for labor power. But it takes potential communities of recognition. And so when I say recognition, I don't just mean good job, guys, like some kind of person pats you on the head or gives you a trophy. There might be some of that, like this actual potential achievement. But I just mean someone else looking at what you've done and understanding the work you've put into it. That's what I mean by recognition. If David Goggins wins the world, the Nobel Prize, not Nobel Prize, Guinness Book of World Record, pull-up competition prize or whatever. He breaks the record for pull-ups. Was it 4,000 pull-ups? It took him like 24 hours to do it. I don't actually know what the number was. Correct me if it was higher than 4,000. But that's objective. Relatively speaking. I mean, speaking somewhat loosely, that's objective. Everyone goes, yep, he's done it. That's the world record. We had a number on it. And did you, I can't see the chat. I wish I could see the chat. I know that people are chatting, but I can't see what they're saying. What did you say?
Rudy said 4,025. I think, yeah, that's about right.
It's based that you even know that. That's awesome. No, it's 4,025. That's like I'm saying, speaking loosely, that's objective. What about when Michael Downs has spent 15 years studying the history of philosophy, and then, 10 years on Lacan and Deleuze and Žižek and Land. And then he, writes a blog post or he gives a lecture on one of those things. Is that something that's like, as loosely speaking, objective as doing 4,025 pull-ups? You didn't see him do it. The only way for him to get recognition for the work that he's done is when someone else who's had to put in similar effort, like Todd McGowan or me, is able to say, I've been looking for someone to explain this concept for 10 or 15 years. I have read tons of secondary literature. I've watched tons of videos. I've read all the articles, and I still don't understand this concept. Until just now, when I read your piece on this, now I get it. You've unlocked it, and now it's actually useful for me. Without that, I at least would not have gotten activated, we'll say, right? It was that professor saying, you can't bullshit with philosophy. I can see that you didn't do the reading. And of course, I had kind of done the reading. I skimmed it. But I couldn't bullshit my way through it. So in Waypoint, especially, I developed that idea that time energy in its real sense is this thing that is made up of multiple constituent elements. The question becomes how to fuse back together what's been torn asunder. Can Humpty Dumpty be put back together again? Well, I say no. Not if that means going back to some previous mode of production prior to air conditioning and books. It's just like no one's going to go for it. It's not realistic. And of course, I'll get people in the comment sections who say time energy is not a real problem because you can go do a startup or a cooperative or have a communal garden, have a commune or whatever. They don't realize, I guess, that would also require time energy, which I said I don't have. And then it would require so much time and energy. I doubt I would end up with leisure time as a result of it, right? Unless someone wants to give me $1 billion to start one, then okay, we can talk. We might be able to figure that out. But then again, too much money can also create this situation where the free time that you have is in no way unconstrained and comfortable. You don't have leisure time if you have high stress, even when you don't have to work. That's not leisure, according to Adorno. And really, it's not leisure according to anybody who's ever had the privilege of living the life of the mind without having to worry about their bills. Like Horkheimer and Adorno's actual administration, they took care of the bills. He didn't even have to think about that. Adorno had secretaries. He could walk around in the room and talk and they would write down what he said so that he didn't have to sit there crouched over his typewriter. And then he could have them categorize all of that for him, right? And Horkheimer was the one out there being like, hey, Felix Weil, we need more money, man. And Felix Weil's like, okay, I'll see what I can do. Horkheimer made it work. Adorno just got to live in the lap of luxury, which is to say, the space of leisure. Heteronomy is the opposite. Heteronomy is the opposite of leisure. It's coercion. It's force. It's that you have to do it. We have to work. And in the exact same way, free time is heteronomous because we have to recreate our labor power. Recreation just means recreate labor power, which is to say recharge, but also psych yourself up to go back to work, which brings us back to the idea of two energies, right? I was saying that Mikey gets, he's the one who first realized, no, you're not going to get there by libido alone. The kind of exhaustion that I feel after a day at the warehouse is not the kind of exhaustion that I feel in other situations when I don't feel motivated. Oh, can you let that person in, Anne? Oh, sorry, I'll do it. I got it. Rudy's trying to get back in here. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that. I'm going to go ahead and erase this, the 4 quadrants. And, as far as the emotional, psychological, spiritual, artistic, physical levels of our life, the dimensions of our human being in the world, I did just do a lecture on that at the beginning of this month. It was an impromptu lecture where I was talking about New Year's goals. I sent you all a link to that in the email yesterday. I think I'll actually add that to the CDT course modules as a recommended viewing thing, because I do believe that one of the natural ways to get into talking about time energy with normies in your life is New Year's goals, because people understand that at a visceral level, because people take on
more than they can follow through on, and then they fail. And then they burn out. And then they wonder why. And then they blame themselves or they blame other people. And then the marriage falls apart. And it tears society apart. So I've talked about the background of this theory, the sort of leading up to it moment, the actually getting serious about philosophy, and the relative time energy that had to be freed up, and then how that was only kind of fused together because of my desperation of where I was coming from, and the potential recognition that got made real when I realized I couldn't bullshit my way through it. Right? But even then, it was a tremendous struggle. And even then, I didn't get to time energy theory. The real seed of time energy theory was trying to organize. I was a campus organizer. I was employed by the student government to organize events. I was trained by them as well. So to some degree, my ability to organize, thank you, North Idaho College student government, for paying me to learn how to organize. I took that organizing work into various forms of political activism back when I was an activist. According to some people's definition, I still am, but that's just because I take action and I'm active as opposed to passive. But obviously, like, I used to actually knock on doors and make phone calls and go to protests and like do the whole thing. And in that organizing period, the biggest problem was that people would commit to things and then not follow through. People were constantly burning out, and jobs were what was taking people over. Jobs were always bringing people back. Doesn't matter how anti-capitalist they were, they always served the boss first. Oh, don't break a strike line, but also if I'm too tired because I had to work, sorry, I'm not going to be able to go to the meeting. You can say what you like, you can believe what you like, but at the bottom, what are your priorities? Rent. Rent is going to be your priority because you don't want to have to get kicked out of your house. So I'm very sympathetic. And I went from being like, wow, people really don't commit, they don't really follow through, to being like, oh, this is an issue that is rooted in this thing called time energy. Because at first, we were just saying time and energy all the time. Everyone's saying, I don't have the time or energy. I don't have the time or energy. And I was reading Marx and Heidegger. And so I started thinking, what is it that makes it so that we don't have time or energy? Right? And it wasn't that first political philosophy class that I took that made me aware of Marx in any sort of a real sense. It was the fact that Marx was not treated fairly on that syllabus. We spent 2 weeks on Rousseau and 1 day on Marx. We spent 2 weeks on John Locke, 1 day on Marx. We spent 2 weeks on Thomas Hobbes, 1 day on Marx. I was like, why did we have to read primary texts for all these other thinkers, but when it came to Marx, we didn't have to read any primary text. It was just cliff notes. That was the first thing that made me realize my professor, who's been playing very neutral about his actual opinions and keeping his cards under the table, probably has some pretty big biases. And I think I could probably start with this Marx guy. Right? Because I was like, is he a conservative or is he a liberal? That was kind of my question throughout the whole course. And then I was like, there's a mysterious third thing. Then I was like, why is this Marx guy not getting taken seriously? And so then I found a professor in an ethics class who kept referencing Marx. And I was like, he likes Marx. So I asked him, I was like, so what's the deal with this guy, this Marx guy? Oh, yeah. Oh, no. That professor doesn't like Marx. No, he doesn't like him. And I was like, well, what? Like, you won't take him seriously? And then, of course, our club, the philosophy club, which got Club of the Year the 2 years that I was there. It was a great time. We had a great time in this club. Was getting called socialists and atheists by the campus Christian club that was called Campus Alive in Christ. So Campus Alive in Christ was going around telling everybody that we were these dirty atheist socialists. And I was like, that statement resembles me, but not the other people in this club. So why do you keep saying it? So I actually went up to them and I was like, why do you guys keep telling people that? I had like the dean of the college or like, sorry, not the dean, one of the guys on like one of the main guys on the board of trustees came up to me at our club when we were like recruiting people. And he said, I understand you guys are socialists and atheists and that you're, brainwashing kids. And he actually is like a combative conservative. He was serious. He was ready to like fight. And I was like, man, you see Aristotle's politics in front of me right now? You see Thomas Hobbes? You think that that's what we're all about? We're about having a diversity of opinions and actually being able to think. And he's just like, well, I heard this and I heard that. So I went up to these Campus Alive in Christ kids and I said, you guys got to stop telling people that. And they're like, well, you guys are constantly talking about atheism and socialism. I was like, yeah, that's because they're interesting topics. And we have atheists and we have socialists, but we also have Catholic conservatives in our club. And you're acting like they're not. Right? So it's creating this tension. Well, after that guy came and talked to us at the table, I'm not going to say his name because in personal conversation, he said that if you ever cross him, he'll send people to take care of you. I'm not even kidding. But he's a local politician or whatever, talks a big game. I don't think he would actually follow through, but his name actually rhymes with douchey. So, it's fitting. After he personally threatened me and he also accused us of being socialists and atheists, and I was only kind of loosely related to those things. I was like, to the vice president of the club, I said, we got to do something about this guy. Like, let's do something shocking. He's like, and so we were planning over summer break. I said, what if when everybody comes back to school in the fall, every building, inside of every building, everywhere you go on campus, there's a giant poster with the face of Karl Marx. And it says the event and the space and the time so that people can come and find out what we're all about. And what we did was we got some professors to talk about Marx. And we had the professor who had taught my ethics class, who was into Marx, actually teach 3 primary texts by Marx, which was Estranged Labor from the 1844 manuscripts, Wage, Labor, and Capital, and the Manifesto. And so he taught these 3 readings for the club. This was not for credit. This was just something that we wanted to do. And so when people came back in the fall and they saw these giant posters, they were not the simple 8.5 by 11 posters. These were not the simple, no, these were like this big. We still have one of them. It's at Anne's house. These cost a pretty penny to print. They were glossy, big, terrifying. We had like 70 people show up to our first event. We never got that kind of a turnout. And mostly people just wanted to eat popcorn and watch the drama ensue. At least that's what I'm assuming. And, we had a sociologist get up there and talk about, he's the thinker who got everyone thinking about class struggle, so he's important, I guess. And then we had the guy, Bruce Bierman, the professor who taught the ethics course, talk about why Marx matters for him and why we would be having this monthly series on some of the primary works by Marx. And of course, in my mind, it's controversial, it's exciting, it's a big FU to that guy who had threatened me. There's a bunch of transgressive reasons that I was doing it, but also having taken a political philosophy course as my gateway into philosophy in the first place, I was excited to fill in the blanks. Why was this guy left off the syllabus in any serious way? Why do we not engage with him seriously? That was all preconditions for actually reading Estranged Labor and going, oh, this kind of alienation from the product, this kind of alienation from the community, this kind of alienation from myself, this kind of alienation from my species being, this is to blame. It's not my parents. This is to blame. It's not me. It's not even that manager I didn't like. It's not even the foreman I didn't like. It's not even those coworkers I didn't like. Ultimately, it's because human beings aren't supposed to live like this. And then, of course, we can get all like, ooh, well, how are humans really supposed to live? Is there really a supposed to? Blah, blah, blah. We can complicate it. And obviously everyone does. And then we can even talk about, well, did the mature Marx have some kind of a radical rupture with his younger self? And, of course, we've been through this. Anybody who's gotten into this stuff hears about it, maybe looks into it, maybe reads Althusser. Oh, this is just his, younger days when he's kind of Feuerbachian and he's critiquing that. Okay, sure. Maybe. Of course, there is that bit in the Grundrisse where I think it's like on page like 215 or some shit, where Marx says that the only meaningful, substantial difference between the worker and the slave is that during the good times in capitalism, the worker is able to attend lectures in the evening, instruct his children, read, enjoy the arts. And so Althusser didn't know about the Grundrisse. He kind of jumped the gun on that one, in my opinion. But what we need to get into in the time that we're here over the next few months is some of the necessary sort of, I would say, prerequisites for time energy theory. Of course, estranged labor is going to be one of them, but so is the sort of existential, phenomenological understanding of time. What is the existential kind of time? Well, it's the kind of time that can drag on if you're watching the tea kettle. It's the way that we don't think about distance from here to there in terms of actual miles or meters or kilometers. No, we actually think in terms of what you can do in that amount of time. It's meaningful, finite, cyclical time. So even if there is a metaphysical, physical, foundational kind of, say, linear time that just goes on forever or whatever, even if that's more real than the existential time, in some kind of a sense, for some kinds of people's thematizations of nature, that is not the standpoint that we take up. It's not the standpoint that we live in. It's not the standpoint that matters for us personally. And we need to stop having people in lab coats who are trying to control everything and towards some specific, probably military funded end, overdetermine everything else about our lives down to how we actually think about time. Clock time, calendar time, great. I don't care. That's fine. But does it dominate us? And if it does, then why does it? And when did that come about? So then this is the question of time. And so I'm going to put time with a big question mark on the whiteboard. And I'm going to say metaphysics. And because physics is not the same thing as metaphysics, I'm going to go ahead and say physics. And then I'm going to go ahead and say existential, phenomenological. And then I'm going to use this word structural in a way that is different from how English literary criticism types of people might use the word, where structural for them is always a matter of how signs hang together. When they say structural, they mean semiotics, basically. But, and that's fine. But I consider Marx to be a structural thinker. I think that critique of political economy, CPE, is what you do if you want a structural understanding of our life world. Now, of course, you can bring in the Borremian knot and the split subject and objet petit a and the phallus and the graph of desire, and those are structures too. Or you could bring in the existential phenomenological, which would be, I'm just going to go ahead and put Dasein here, which is that there's a kind of being in the world that we can call human that is nothing like the other objects of science, any other subject matter. It is unique in a lot of ways. And so
thinking about what it means to say that time energy is an existential for being in the world, BITW, is how I always write it. Well, that requires this text, Being in Time. It's not a book you read in a weekend or during a half hour at the pool, while sun tanning. And so we're not going to really be able to get into it seriously. But at some point during this series, you're going to all get a 1.5 hour crash course on what I think matters in that text that was formative for time energy theory. And in order to give you that, I'll have to obviously simplify to some degree. And I'll probably try to simplify it to the point where it could make sense to somebody who's never read philosophy, because I like to take on challenges. And then the people who've actually taken this course with me, where they've gone through every chapter, they can evaluate how I did. But CPE is kind of the same. I will have to basically give you Das Kapital in a lecture. So this is why I said that the actual schedule that you see when you go to the syllabus is a plan B, because I can't tell you when I'm going to get a fit of inspiration and actually get the work done to be able to pull 3 volumes of Capital or all of Being in Time into one single lecture. But I'll actually have to do the same thing with Lacan. And so that's the next thing here. I got to put underneath time with a question mark. I got to put energy with a question mark. And now I have 2 energies here, you see? I really messed up that G, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that because that's annoying. Energies. What does it mean that we have potentially 2 kinds of energy? The one that is happening at the level of caloric intake and exercise and basic expenditure, and then a kind that can make us go beyond the bounds of what is thought to be humanly possible, and that can make it so that we can't get out of bed in the morning, even though we're fully rested, or that can make it so that we take on a difficult work of philosophy or a new art form. What is that? Well, that's seemingly libidinal energy. The people who've thought the most about it are psychoanalysts. That doesn't mean I think they're correct, or insofar as I do think they're correct, it doesn't mean that it necessarily tells us the whole story. Kinesiology is a science that might tell us as much as psychoanalysis, except that it's probably about the other kind of energy, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just put up here libidinal energy versus, I'm not going to write kinesiology. I don't even want to try to spell that right now. I'm just going to write physical. Physical energy. But psychoanalysts are not the only people who've thought about libidinal energy. They just think about it as libidinal energy. But it's not necessarily the only way of thinking about it. We also have this word vitality. Uh-oh, we're there. Camera's overheating. Good thing the lecture's almost over. And you're needed. So I'm going to go ahead and put psychoanalysis right here. And then, of course, psychoanalysis is mostly relevant for intellectuals in the 21st century because of the work of one man more than anyone else. And that is Jacques Lacan. There are 2 amazing courses that are going to be happening at Theory Underground this year on the work of Lacan. One is going to be beginning on, I think it's February 28th, and it's a 5-week. Don't be fooled by the mistake in the marketing materials say that it's a 4-week course, but it's actually a 5-week course. Leon Brenner is going to be teaching us about the clinical structures of psychoanalysis and the autistic structure, right? So we live in an increasingly autistic society. Everyone's autistic, we say, but that's speaking loosely, obviously. So what's really going on? Well, we can't even have some kind of a referent without having some kind of a theory of autism. And so Brenner's going to be bringing us that, but also just the clinical structures. How do we know what they are, how they work? Well, he's going to show us. And then the first public seminar that Lacan ever put on was Seminar 11. This was after he had been canceled everywhere else. And so I'm going to let Sue in here. And Seminar 11 will be taught in July by Todd McGowan, which is going to be amazing. And Todd McGowan has ideas about how goals and drive relate to time energy. And it relates in ways that are similar to what to things that Mikey and I have tossed around in our conversations trying to theorize the energy side of time energy. But of course, there really are these two kinds of energy. And I'm never going to be the master psychoanalyst. And so I hope that there are people who know a lot more about psychoanalysis who plan on doing stuff with the libidinal energy side of things. Vitality, I think of Nietzsche and Arendt. I think they are these amazing thinkers of vitality. But you could also probably say D&G. D&D. No, D&G are like a kind of, they're vitalists, right? And so, but they're part of this tradition of libidinal materialism. They're all part of this tradition of libidinal materialism. If you want to know more about that, watch the Introduction to Nick Land series that Mikey gave, which is very popular right now on the Theory Underground YouTube channel. So basically, we have to think about time and we have to think about energy, and we have to think about it through these people who have been foundational, and not just people, but also concepts and also primary texts and also disciplines. And the idea of discipline is a real problem for me because every subject matter, in order to get a grasp on it, requires some kind of discipline. And that different subject matters require different disciplinary approaches. And at this point, we're crossing many wires. How does the existentialist phenomenological hermeneutical method cross or contradict the critique of political economy approach? And then how does the clinic in psychoanalysis and the concepts developed there for that task come in to intervene and inform the work being done with these other texts, thinkers, concepts, disciplines? These are problems for us, and they're not going to be brushed over lightly. They're going to be drawn out in the same way that we want to kind of wring out every bit of meaning we can with this concept and use it in a lot of different ways and take on a lot of different perspectives. We also want to tarry with, and work through the problems of method, because nothing like a rigorous or systematic way of thinking about this concept is going to come out of sort of eclectically throwing together these thinkers. It's cool. It's fun. It's fun to just kind of throw them together. But if I want this to be taken seriously, I have to think about this question of method. If you all just want to have fun and draw off of these thinkers and kind of write your own kind of first-person standpoint pieces that use this concept here and that concept there, I do that as well. I think that's awesome. But as far as like laying the groundwork for time energy research in the long term, say the next 100 years, I'm serious about this. This is what I think is needed, is to realize that the methodological problems are problems. And we'll get into all of that. And so I've talked about the background of time energy theory. I've talked about the method. I've talked about the big questions being the nature of time and the nature of energy and the various things that we're drawing upon for that.
But what I did not talk about is the purpose of time energy theory. What is the point? Is it? Let me go ahead and I need a space up here. So I'm going to go ahead and just take out these. I'm going to take out capital. I'm going to take out Dasein. I'm going to take out being in the world. I'm going to take out metaphysics, physics, existential, phenomenological, structural. I'm going to take all that out off the whiteboard and write the big old word with orange here. Purpose. Question mark. Now you could say that there's different purposes. You could say that those different purposes are related to different people's specific goals. So then my question is, what are some that come to mind, whether you read the book so far or not? What do you think the purpose of time energy theory is? Real question. And you can just free associate. You don't have to try too hard. Mikey, you can go too if you're here.
Can I go? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the question, what is a good life, a lot in that sense.
Yes.
So like, the purpose is how to live a good life, to understand it, I would say.
I spent, yes, that's perfect. That's exactly right. And I spent this kind of exercise where I ask the students, okay, why are you going to college? Okay, but like, what's the bigger reason why you need money? And what's the bigger reason why you do this and that? And I kept trying to milk it out of them. And the most I could get them to was like friends, family, money. And I was trying to obviously get to the idea of like, what is the good life? And when I did finally get to it, it was kind of just like, they're all like, you could tell like they'd never thought about it before. And I said, this is the foundational question of the university itself. This is the foundational question of philosophy and coming out of philosophy, all of the sciences. Now, we tend to focus on what's real and how do we know? But the only reason we care about what's real, and the only reason we care that we know that our answers to that question have any kind of validity or soundness, is because of the question, what is the good life? So we all want to think about this question because everyone's always telling us the answers. And so, of course, we're going to start to question whether the answers that we're being given have anything to them in the first place. Is that just what we're supposed to believe, or is that really the meaning of the good life? And then, of course, everybody who thinks that they have an answer, what I call worldview salesmen, all the worldview salesmen come running forward. I'm going to tell you what's real. I'm going to tell you what's important. I'm going to tell you how we know. Of course, they'll tell you how we know only if you push them on it. That's not where they go to. But roughly speaking, what's real and how do we know is metaphysics and epistemology. And philosophy does tend to focus on the personal standpoint, whereas critical theory focuses on the social. So we can kind of just go personal and social. And then we could also say institutions. What are the institutions of power, right? But also, if you think you already know what it is, and it's capitalism. Capitalism is the institution of power that is primarily blocking our access to the good life, or at least blocking access for most people. Then it's less of a question, and time energy theory is for the purpose of
at least throwing a wrench in the gears of the machine. And if not just throwing a wrench in the gears of the machine, it might actually cause a radical change. And if it causes a radical change, it's going to be because people realize that money cannot buy them time energy. Time energy can buy them money, but never the other way around. Right? Once you realize that, it creates a serious problem. Once you realize that there are activities that cannot be bought. You can buy a violin, but you cannot buy playing it. You cannot buy practicing it. You cannot buy regularly investing that relative time energy towards practicing it. If you buy it and then you can't practice it, then it sits there and you feel stupid and you feel like your calling is frustrated, and then you never really get to see if that's what you were supposed to do. And ultimately, you have to be able to experiment with different things before you figure out what's right for you in the first place. But if you can't experiment with the liberating arts, you're fucked. And so some people go, no, it's capitalism. That's already in the way. Controversially, perhaps for a lot of you, I'm not sure. I don't know your political assumptions, of course, but potentially controversially for many, I do not think that socialism is necessarily a solution. I think that, whereas that could be perhaps a necessary condition, it's not a sufficient condition. If people think that labor is the sole source of value, not just under capitalism, but they believe in all time, in all ways, then any sort of socialistic move in society will be to dignify labor, to dignify the laborers, to perhaps compensate them more fairly, but that doesn't necessarily create the kind of radical reprioritization and structuring necessary to free up time energy. If capitalism could get me my
Can I
time...
read a quote?
Mikey's going to read a quote.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't participated much. I'm still kind of
Here, I'm
recuperating
gonna
from being sick, but there's a
Before you
quote
read
that I
it-
actually
before
came
you-
across today that's relevant.
Go for it.
All right, so this is Vladimir piece, I guess, called Left-Wing Childishness. Now you got to read between the lines here, but I'm going to read the quote, and then Dave, I'll kind of suggest what I'm getting at, but then I'll let you riff, because you and I have, there's other quotes that we know about, right? But this one's relevant. So this is I think of this as like Lenin the accelerationist because of the first sentence, but it's the second sentence that's relevant here. So he says, socialism is inconceivable without large-scale capitalist engineering based on the latest discoveries of modern science. Okay, there he sounds like, a left accelerationist. But then he goes on to say, it is inconceivable without a planned state organization which keeps tens of millions of people to the strictest observance of a unified standard in production and distribution. Let me read that second part again. So this whole thing about reaching socialism via large-scale capitalist engineering based on the latest discoveries of modern science, which would include technological advancements. He says all that is inconceivable without planned state organization that keeps tens of millions of people to the strictest observance of a unified standard in production and distribution. And then he goes on, we Marxists have always spoken of this, and it is not worthwhile wasting 2 seconds talking to people who do not understand even this. Here's the point. That second part, he's saying there's going to have to be a state apparatus that keeps tens of millions of people to the strictest labor regiment, production distribution regiment, in order to secure this the achievement of socialism, which is to say tens of millions of people who are not going to have their time energy. Okay, well, sorry, Dave, you're muted.
Thank you. There we go. There we go. We're good? All right. So
Yeah.
what I was saying is, perfect timing with that quote. So I basically, as soon as you finished reading it, I started talking, but my microphone wasn't set up yet because I'm switching places from the whiteboard to I don't have this all automated yet. So right now I have to push a bunch of buttons before I'm actually
Here, I'm going to put it in the chat too.
Microphone. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great quote. That was awesome. Good timing. So someone could say, well, I'm for reformed socialism that would be able to radically restructure and get you everything that you're talking about, Dave. And I would say, cool. Have you convinced everybody else who's a socialist? Because and are you going to be represented in that government? And if that government takes over, would they take you seriously? And this is why I believe that there is an intellectual vanguard that is needed, that is currently lacking. Insofar as there is an intellectual vanguard, whether, if we're talking about socialists, we might say that it's Jody Dean and Paul Cockshott or something like that. Cool. Would they be taken seriously by whoever takes over, these future Bolsheviks or whatever? Would they be taken seriously? And would they take us seriously? Would they show us how we could have our time energy? Right? That's why we like Andre Gors, because he seemed to care about the politics of time in this way that most others have lost track of. But of course, it's not just time. Andre Gors is aware that freeing up some time in the week isn't a sufficient condition. It just gets eaten up by heteronymous free time, because he uses the example of the single mother working 2 jobs. She has nothing but chores and errands to run. So when the free time gets freed up because her job, gave her more free time or whatever, nope, she's not actually able to do that. She has errands and chores. It's all this urgent but important stuff that takes up the place of the stuff that's not urgent but is nonetheless important, to use the language of Covey. Well, Gors gets that, but because he's not thinking time energy, he didn't go far enough with the existential phenomenological side. We're needed. And I would actually say that he sees that, because for his book, which one is it? It's Farewell to the Working Class. I think it's at the end of the introduction. He actually says we need a sort of phenomenology of time for the sake of the kind of project he's talking about. Well, when I actually wrote my existentialist phenomenological theory of labor power in my master's thesis, I did not know about Andre Gors, or I would have heavily referenced him. And I didn't know that I was kind of doing what he said needed to be done. And it's the kind of thing that Mikey and I have been working on our own and together for a long time in our various capacities. And it's ultimately what Theory Underground is all about. And there's all these other courses that might seem unrelated. Oh, the idea of the university course, the professional managerial class, consciousness and ideology class. What is that? Why do we do intro to Nick Land? Why do we do well, all of these in some way are part of a grand plan. If you ever want to see the grand plan, just let me know. I'll roll it out for you. But it's all part of a big research project that I feel I need to be able to do before I can write the book. And the book is something that goes far beyond a dissertation project and requires me actually teaching these things that I think I know something about at this point in my development, but that I need to really put myself to the test, and I need other people to hear me out and ultimately think it through and potentially criticize it. Right? I actually need that. And even if it doesn't happen, it's the fact that you're here and that it might happen that makes that potential recognition possible, that potential pushback possible, which ultimately makes me have to step up in a way that I would not be able to otherwise, because I lack the supports for fusing together my torn asunder and disparate pieces of time and energy towards something meaningful. Like they're like this, flying around, and the idea is to like bring them together towards this end. And the end is, I kind of see the end, but then there's my work life. I actually have to work. And Theory Underground has become a vehicle that makes possible whatever is going on here. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being a part of this research seminar. I really look forward to what's going to come out of it. Thanks for this great first session. Without your participation as listeners, taking this seriously, it would not have been the same. And so I really appreciate it. And now we got to go to work. Speak of the devil, I'll push the button for you all since you're all there we go. Give it up for Anne. Yeah. Normally we'll have a bit more time for an actual sort of Q&A thing here at the end. Nobody raised their hand in the last couple minutes, and so I'm actually just going to close it out. And we will have a conversation in 2 weeks. You'll have time to rewatch parts of this if you're interested, to return to the readings. If you didn't get to any of the readings in the first place, you'll have a chance now. Hopefully the relevance of certain texts will stand out and you'll be able to go back to them. They'll be requilted in a new light. And I really look forward to hearing what you're all going to talk about. Every month, we're going to give you a new assignment. And we forgot to talk about the assignments. And so your assignment this time, normally Anne will be the one talking about assignments, but the assignment this time is very simple. I want you to think about what kinds of activities give you energy as opposed to what kinds of activities take your energy. Not only what kind give you versus take from you, but also are there certain kinds of activities that are preconditions for other activities that give you energy? Does anyone have a clarifying question on that assignment? I know it's kind of a confusing way of saying it.
So we have to think of the activity which gives us the condition to experience activities that would give us energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I mean, work gets in the way of me having the energy to do this thing that I love to do. Okay, but are there things that you do throughout your month that give you energy to do things that you are surprised you're actually able to do, considering the fact that you have so little relative time energy? And then, you can always broaden the scope of the question to just thinking about your time and energy and how you work your work-life balance out, how you survive, and just come prepared to talk about that. But pay attention to how your life works out over the next month. Take notes if you get inspired to, and then bring those to the discussion that we will have on, why did I say the first Sunday? It's not, I kept saying it's the first Sunday of February. But then I thought we had 2 weeks. All right, don't trust me on dates. We'll get back to you with what's going to work. It might be the first Sunday of February, but it might not be. We have to put our heads together and actually figure that out. But we got to bounce. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like, it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, and it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy.
Usually a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist who's like, oh, so-and-so's a new book, have them on your show. No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them, that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of Underground Theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.